The Business of Biotech is produced by Life Science Connect and its community of learning, solving, and sourcing resources for biopharma decision makers. If you're working on biologics process development and manufacturing challenges, you need to swing by bioprocessonline.com. If you're trying to stay ahead of the cell or gene therapy curve, visit cellandgene.com. When it's time to map out your clinical course, let clinicalleader.com help. And if optimizing outsourcing decisions is what you're after, check out outsourcepharma.com. We're Life Science Connect, and we're here to help. Good Therapeutics made a splash last fall when Roche snapped the company up for its PD-1 IL-2 program. The $250 million plus milestones deal, in large part orchestrated by CBO, Dr. Neela Patel, was a nice one for Good, but in a way it left CEO, Dr. John Mulligan, in a bit of a quandary. What should he do now? What should he do with what remained of Good's technical assets, its intellectual property, and perhaps most importantly, its incredibly talented people? I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech, and while everyone saw the deal play out, on today's episode of the podcast, we're getting the untold inside stories of both the Good Therapeutics acquisition and the subsequent rebirth of its heart and soul into Bonum Therapeutics. Here to share those stories with us are none other than Doctors Neela Patel and John Mulligan. Neela and John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
I'm honored. I'm honored to have you guys here. And I want to get to know, like, we're going to do some backstory stuff before we get into the acquisition and the subsequent rebirth of the company as Bonum and how all that played out. But first, I want to get to know you two a little bit. Neela, your background is intriguing to me. You had this PhD in molecular biology. You took that seemingly directly into a career in the biopharma industry doing research at Roche. Was that your intent back then? Like when you were working through that PhD, did you want to come into industry right away, or was it sort of an opportunity that moved you away from academia? What was your intent?
You know, actually, it was my intention, and I was not necessarily exactly as my classmates were. Many of them wanted to stay in academia. The backstory for me is that I did a summer internship at a very young Genentech when it was an unrenovated warehouse. And that got me really excited about a career in drug discovery. I felt like it was something where I could help people and that it would be intellectually challenging. And I looked around at the folks who were working there and realized I wanted to work on the strategic side, help make decisions about the kind of programs we would pursue, the way we pursued them. And I realized I needed to get a PhD in order to do that. So I knew all along that was my goal. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm gonna ask you some questions, I think, later on about the transition into the business side of it as chief business officer. But John, I want to learn about your transition into industry as well. You had a pretty established position in academia. You moved from research right into founding Blue Heron, and then on to like serial biotech entrepreneurship. And I'll ask you some questions about that later as well. But what was your intention? What was the allure to biotech?
Yeah, so I, as an undergrad and grad student, worked for faculty members going through tenure. And that kind of turned me off the whole idea of academia. So in my postdoc, with Ron Davis, he and David Botstein were setting up one of the early human genome centers and offered me a position there, helping set that up. So I spent 3 years doing that. And the contrast between a program like that, where we were trying to bring together a whole bunch of different disciplines to solve a problem, and being in a sort of narrow academic department, really pushed me in the direction of industry. So the next job that I took was at Darwin Molecular as a director of genomics there, really given the mission to try to apply genetics and the new nascent sequencing technology to drug discovery. And so that, and what I loved about that company was the multidisciplinary aspect of having chemists and software developers and geneticists and biologists, immunologists all working together to try to solve an interesting problem. But that company, we didn't have a clue. We had a whole great scientific team, and we did some really interesting stuff, but really no clue as to how to operate this business. What our real business model was. The model was basically to become a pharmaceutical company, but with no idea of steps in between. And so, well, that's what got me into starting my first company. Was really the thinking. I'd moved from an academic environment into a company and just started thinking a lot about the business models, like how do you make the science work well and still make sense as a business. I mean, we had a fantastic board. It was Lee Hood and George Rathman and Bill Gates and Paul Allen. I mean, you couldn't have picked a better set of business leaders, and yet somehow as a company, we couldn't come together as a business.
Yeah, that had to provide a lot of learning experience for you, the stumbles, scraping your knees along the way. I'm thinking about it like in terms of Neela's transition. She had a taste of industry first and then decided, boy, the PhD would really help me sink my claws into this space. You came in from academia and to your point, the establishing of the business aspect was a bit challenging. What was like in terms of that challenge, what was key to I guess wrapping your mind around, coming out of this narrow, very pointed focus in academia and research? What did you find most challenging, like the best learning experience around, okay, here's what I'm going to need to apply to make a business case?
I think you can apply the same kind of problem solving skills that you need. I was a geneticist by training. And I mean, the core of that as an intellectual discipline is figuring out what the problem is and then figuring out a good way to solve it. And so it's the same. I mean, all the same intellectual tools apply to business, the same kind of creativity, coming up, seeing what's actually there and seeing how you can make something work. And then as with science, there's a long period of struggle and, takes if you're doing anything on the cutting edge of science, most of what you do is wrong. And learning how to sort of deal with that is part of being a good scientist. And that also applies well in the world of business where you're going to, you make mistakes and then you correct.
Yeah. Does what's more consequential, being wrong in science or being wrong in business?
If you're playing it right, you're going to be wrong. I mean, you have to plan to be wrong some of the time. And so that's the whole strategy, is to be able to succeed without being right all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's like the core of how to make either of them work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Neela, you another interesting inflection point in your career after you earned that PhD, established yourself in industry. You spent time at places like Genentech and Abbott, AbbVie, Seattle Genomics, just to name a few. And then at some point you joined Good, which was at the time a much smaller company. And we see this quite frequently, but I'm always interested in the intention there. Sort of what motivates that move away from big bio as we know it to a startup. Absolutely.
And I would say that in the first half of my career, I worked on the R&D side, in a lab, then leading a lab, then leading a small group, and then leading, research in a small biotech company. So I had a good feel for what it took to move a drug forward or identify from discovery all the way through IND filing. And then when I went to business development, I had been looking for a startup to join where I could have a really significant impact on the company. And I looked around at a few companies and they just didn't seem suitable for me. So when I joined BD on the buy side, I realized that I would have this great opportunity to look at hundreds and hundreds of companies, which I did. I mean, on average, maybe 400 to 500 a year. And it took me 12 years to find a startup that met my criteria.
Wow.
And yeah, I wanted a company that had a platform so it would not just be a single product company, heads up or tails up, and that's it. I wanted one where the platform had some proof of concept that the thing actually was working. team was incredibly important to me because I'm at a point in my life where I want to enjoy my work life and I want to enjoy my colleagues. And I wanted a board that I could work with because we've all seen that boards can have an incredibly big influence, positive and negative, on outcomes at a company. So I felt like Good Therapeutics checked every box, and it was like winning the lottery for me. I was really thrilled to join, and I couldn't be happier with my decision.
You're not just saying that because John's on the call with us, are
No,
you?
I'm really not. You can ask my parents. They're like, "You sound so happy in this job."
John,
So CGen was evaluating. We were talking about a deal with CGen, and Neela was on the other side of that discussion. And we did wait until CGen rejected us before we made the actual job offer. So,
John, tell me about that job offer. It's interesting. I have a lot of conversations with the leaders of biotechs around selection of talent. And sometimes obviously there are many varying opinions. When you see someone like Neela, who's got a pretty strong research background, good science background, has transitioned into more interest in the business development side. What are the pros and cons there? Like, what's appealing about her background and putting her in a business development position versus what might be a potential red flag?
Yeah, so there's a couple of aspects of that, and one is our goal as an organization is to be completely science driven and to not have nothing get in the way of making decisions that are based on results, which seems kind of obvious, but isn't always true. You're not always given that luxury. And so I wanted everybody in management to really be a scientist, to be somebody who really understood. So that's, a critical aspect of it. Another part is just, I want a company where, and I think we built a company where we can have trust and transparency, where the people you're working with are good at their jobs. You can trust them to do their jobs. You can focus on your job. And there's a free flow of communication. So there was a real need to pick people who could fit in an environment like that. And there's certain, it's easier to find like a pure research person who's doing that finding. Not everybody, I'll try to put this kindly, not everybody in business development is a really nice and straightforward person. And so picking somebody in sales and business development, one of the characteristics is being able to just to sell and to convince people of things. And so finding people who are really genuine, who are really good at their jobs, it's a challenge. And I think that we had, I'd met Neela, other members of the company had worked with her in the past. And so we knew going in that she was going to be a great choice. And we had a great project for her to work on. That's the other piece in terms of recruiting people, is to have motivating people is really straightforward if there's something really interesting for them to do. And so the way that we grew the company was to add on functions when we really needed them. And so Neela was one of the first hires after we got the results that led to the acquisition by Roche, the really cool, super interesting animal data. So we could show her that data. And as a scientist, she could evaluate it and say, yes, this is something that
yeah.
And I'd say on the recruitee side, it was extremely attractive to me for that philosophy of we are science-based, we're fact-based, and we're not going to go out there with an incomplete data set to try to get somebody, interested. We're going to show them what we have, all of it. And that's what it is. And so for me, the selling piece of it is not selling something that is, not a full picture or not honest with the other party, at which point it becomes a very easy job in terms of being sincere about being excited about the science and being able to show it in a way that's real.
Yeah. Yeah, and I totally appreciate that. I mean, I think it's refreshing actually. I appreciate it because it is real, although not necessarily the standard in BD, right? In biotech, BD can be a flash in the pan kind of, pretty tough business. What about the deal making part of it? Like, once you've gotten past the acceptance of the science and the technology, and you're very transparent, you're real, you're a scientist yourself, you understand what you're telling these folks, you get to the point where, all right, let's start wheeling and dealing, let's start making some deals. Where'd you learn that, Neela? Like where does that come from?
I learned that on both sides of the table, because throughout the second part of my research career, I was sitting on the evaluation side for deals and looking at them from a very just pure technical point of view, partnering with a BD person and helping give them input like this would be this valuable to us, but not more than that. So I was more an advising, but not at the negotiating table. And then at Seagen, I was clearly the one negotiating on behalf of Seagen in a buy role. But, negotiation, it almost doesn't matter what side of the table you're on. You need to figure out what the key needs of both parties are, and if there's a way to get those met. And you try to get to that as soon as you can, because sometimes it's just a walk away. Look, this is our need is this financially. And the other side says, I cannot do that. It's actually impossible. Okay, we get it. We respect and accept that. Let's move on. So I feel like the fundamentals of negotiating, understanding the other party's needs, understanding yours, looking for creative solutions, something that John mentioned before, being really creative. How can we make this pie bigger? How can we make this happen and have everybody come out with what they wanted?
Yeah. Neela, I had a couple episodes prior to the airing of this episode, I had, excuse me, Nuhad Husseini, who's the VP of Business Development at Regeneron, on the show. And he's responsible for quite a few of Regeneron's big deals. And the entire episode was focused on, his introspective look at his art and science of deal making. It was great. And I asked him this question. I want to ask you the same question. He gave me, I'm not going to tell you how he answered. He gave me a really good response, but I'm going to ask you the same question I asked him. Cause I'm an emotive person. I ask my kids, they'll tell you like, mom's like super level headed and cool. Dad, you never know where his hands are going to go when he's talking. How do you sometimes you get into a deal opportunity and you become invested in it. You become, professionally, perhaps emotionally invested in the opportunity, right? Like you throw your heart and soul into it. When things aren't going right, or when things aren't going like the way you anticipated they would go, how do you maintain emotional checks and balances?
I think for me, you're right. You cannot really do a big deal without putting your heart into it. But you have to keep a little bit of distance as well, not only for your sanity, but also to be effective at the negotiating table. Because the minute that you flip into the mode of, I have to get this done, or it destroys who I am or my career or whatever, you've lost all your power at the negotiating table. You can't operate the way you need to. So, for me, I've been very lucky to have John and a supportive board as thought partners. So we're always working on what is our alternative to getting this deal done. Let's make sure we have a path forward without the deal. In which case, when you're at the table, yes, you're sincere, you want to do it, you're passionate, but you're not do or die about it. And that distance is really valuable. That's not to say that there weren't days that I would, leave the negotiating table and just need to go for a nice walk and see something beautiful, or cook a nice dinner, or go to ceramics and make something, with my hands to get out the frustration. But the other
I asked Nuhad that follow-up question. I said, we actually talked about his like decompression exercises. I totally get that.
Yeah. And
John,
the part, can I just talk? One more thing about emotive. I think there's something in business development, and actually in general in interactions in the professional or even private sphere, you need to recognize your emotions and learn to work with them, because there were times when I just was so angry and I thought, I'm just going to blow my top. And I was like, no, just take it calm, take it easy, set that emotion aside. And there were other times when I was like, ooh, expressing my frustration or a negative emotion, but calmly, like, hey, we feel pretty angry about the fact that you countered with this. That's not working for us. Sometimes the other side needs to know where you are emotionally, not just numbers on paper, but needs to know that they've actually hit your limit, or, oh, things are going great. We really appreciate how hard you're working with us to get this done. So, I think using it and modulating in a way that makes sense.
Yeah. Self-awareness and knowing your audience. Yeah. Yeah. John, you've done this a few times. You've sold companies to Origin, Roche, obviously, Eli Lilly. So you've got a bit of a track record for building attractive biotechs. Can you share some thoughts on common threads among those, perhaps hallmarks of some of these companies that you've built, whether or not for acquisition, companies that you've built that have been acquired?
Yeah.
The silver, just a couple silver bullets. That's all.
Well, I'm not sure that the path I've taken is really applicable I can tell you what the hallmarks are, but I'm not sure I would advise anybody else to do that, but if you look at the pattern of things that I've done, they've all started with an idea, and everything we've done has been invented internally. So we've never licensed anything in. I've tried to focus on just sort of the obvious point of focusing on problems where there's a big impact. It's just as hard to solve a small problem as it is to solve a really big problem. There's like an axis of technical complexity and value of the problem. And there's very few things in the very valuable, low technical complexity area, but there's lots of things in the low value, high technical complexity quadrant. And so you want to kind of pick where both they're hard so that it's worth doing, and there's real value there. And the other thing for me is every time I've done something new, it's been something really new. So I did a synthetic, my first company was a drug discovery company based around sequencing and combinatorial chemistry, Darwin molecular. The next thing I did was a synthetic biology company where we were trying to automate the moving data from the computer into the lab, DNA. Then I did a diabetes company, and now we're in immuno-oncology. And so each time for me, it's like learning a whole new field. And so it's like you can bring new insights into a field, but to have any impact, you also have to bring in people like Diane Hollenbaugh or CSO or Neela or CBO who really have knowledge in the field. So it's a combination of invention and new perspectives and expertise.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that I've learned, and I'll touch on this in a number of places, I think, in this discussion, is that planning ahead with the knowledge that, no plan survives contact with the enemy, but just with the example of a good discussion, a good Roche discussion, we had alternatives. We were able to do that negotiation because I lined up a financing that was structured to support that. We were actively pursuing taking the molecule into the clinic ourselves. We had the financing and the expertise in place to do that, which gave Neela the opportunity to walk away from the table, which you have to have.
That optionality. Yeah. Yeah. So what was, let's get into that good therapeutics acquisition deal. I didn't know how to phrase it. Like, I think I called it a sell and pivot I don't know if you'd characterize it that way.
Yeah.
But leading into it, what was, what sort of drove the acquisition opportunity with Roche?
Well, I can't speak to Roche's internal decision making, obviously, but I can comment that they had their own PD-1 IL-2 program that was in the clinic. And so they already had established preclinical models, and they knew what their clinical data looked like. It wasn't published at that point, but that was in their shop. So they were extremely well positioned to be able to evaluate our molecule versus theirs and to be able to recognize the value. In fact, they spent about a year under MTA evaluating the molecule, prior to us signing the deal. I'll also just comment a bit on the acquisition structure, which we can come back to, but that structure of acquisition really allowed Roche on day one to have full control over the program. And we often see deals where the small biotech wants to do co-development, wants to be at the table, wants to have a JRC and so on. And that can really slow things down. I'm not saying there aren't places and times when co-development is the right thing to do, but in this circumstance, it was both our goal to sell the asset outright. That gave an early return to our investors. And it was Roche's goal to be able to take that program forward in the way that they thought was best for the molecule. Mm-hmm. So both the deal structure as well as their experience with PD-1 IL-2, I think, were key factors.
I'm going to ask a follow-up to that I invite both of you to comment on, and that's just around the general. So this was November of last year that the deal was finalized. Is that correct? November 22-ish?
That's when the post-financing was done. So the deal was done September 26th. That was the actual close date.
Okay. Yeah. And even, I mean, for the past several years, IL-2 has been, it's been a space that's it's been banged up, right? Like there have been a lot of losers in that space. A lot of companies have been, we'll say they've struggled their way through, right? I mean, was there any concern going into the deal, or was that part of the motivating factor? Like, this space has suffered some bumps and bruises.
I think that's actually central to a lot of the dynamic of this, which is that we were talking to other potential buyers, before we had this discussion. What Roche had that nobody else had was the ability to run our molecule through their mouse models right next to the molecule they already had in the clinic. And so they had human clinical data on our positive control, or the molecule that we used as a positive control. And that let them see the value of an IL-2 product in a way that nobody else could.
Yeah.
I will just say that while there is a graveyard of second generation IL-2s out there,
many of them not yet dead.
Right, the clinical data with IL-2 itself, it's compelling. Yes, it's extremely toxic. Patients have to be in the ICU, to receive it so that nothing goes wrong. And, I think that there is clear clinical evidence that IL-2, if it could be safely administered, could make a difference, to the trajectory of patients' disease. I think that, right? I mean, John, do you?
Yeah, IL-2 alone, monotherapy with IL-2, even though it's no longer used, is for long-term outcomes is not a whole lot worse than checkpoint, which is a huge drug. It's like low double digits, high single digit for durable responses. So that's a real drug. It's just not quite good enough, and it's way too toxic. And so I wanted to get back a little bit to the structure of the deal, and then I guess we'll come back to the pivot. But we did part of the structure, and part of when we were doing the Series A for good, part of the pitch was we're going to sell at least the first program or two as an individual asset and get a return to investors. Because one of the I think it's pretty broadly recognized now that in the past, platform companies have had a real sort of structural problem, which is that you get together this great group of scientists, you solve some really cool new problem, you developed a tool that will give you a new drug. And as soon as you get your first new drug, 90% of the value of the company is that new drug. Mm-hmm. And there's a really strong incentive to put all of your investment. That just drags, it's like a black hole that drags all of the resources of the company forward to the detriment. And it takes a whole different set of people to do that than it takes to do to have built that first drug. And so what I wanted to do in setting up the structure was to keep the value of all the work that we'd done to get to that point. And so we had planned this structure, the spin, right from the start. It was the goal of the company was to stay together as a team and be able to spin out these individual programs.
So you knew that, like, prior to even sitting down at having conversations with Roche, John?
It was part of how we selected. That was something that the investors bought into before they made their investment, the Series A investors.
When you enter into the conversation with Roche with that mindset, knowing that you want to keep this team, you want to keep this platform, you want to maintain that IP and those assets and move forward as a new entity, does it take anything away from you in the negotiation from your company? Like, does it give you, I guess, remove any leverage or look less attractive to the buying company?
If you look historically, people have paid the same amount for a single asset as they will for. That's the monetary way of expressing that, which is we could have sold the whole company for basically the same price, because that's what the value is. The value is that first program.
Yeah.
And interestingly, Roche's perspective when we explained how we wanted to manage the transaction, they actually were quite happy. They didn't have to deal with lease obligations, employees and associated benefits, equipment, reagents, other agreements to which we were party. Wood took care of all of that for them. I will say there was a lot of paperwork and a very long punch list, that we worked through. Yeah. But at the end of the day, they were happy. They wanted the intellectual property related to PD-1 IL-2, and they needed a license to our core platform technology to be able to practice that. And we were able to cleave that off very cleanly by leaving that in Good Therapeutics and taking all the employees, leases, all those other things I just mentioned, and moving those over to Bonum. And it gave Bonum a really quick start. We didn't look like a typical Series A company because on day one of our funding, we had a fully operational company with people coming to work who had all the equipment, they had programs to work on, and we were just off the racing blocks rapidly. So, for us, it was advantageous as well. There was never a point where Roche expressed a desire to have any of those things that
it really wasn't on the table when we went in, and that didn't seem to be a problem. I think that, as Neela said, I think they saw it at least as neutral, maybe as an advantage.
Yeah. Let's say that there was no acquisition. Let's say that Good Therapeutics just decided for whatever reasons, whatever strategic reasons, it was going to rebrand itself and maybe, shift a little bit in terms of its pipeline strategy and portfolio strategy. That in and of itself isn't a trivial task. Like when you're managing your way through a significant acquisition and simultaneously, crafting, albeit, recognizing that you've got the staff, you've got the infrastructure, you've got the people, still creating a new company, essentially. It's that's a lot to have on your plate all at once. So John, tell me a little bit about that when you were, preparing for, post acquisition. Here we are. Here's Bonum. What went in? How do you manage your way through that simultaneous activity? That's a big question, I know.
Yeah. So we'd spun Bonum off about a little over a year and a half before, and so we've been thinking about it all along. And when the actual signing the deal occurred, everybody was laid off. on Monday evening and hired back on Tuesday morning. And so from the point of view of working there, it was completely seamless. And so I think the way that we dealt with the transition was, it wasn't a big pivot or a transition, that we had been planning all along to have many programs running. This is the one that leaped to the fore. It wasn't even the lead program until we got that bit of data. It was kind of second in line. We got this really compelling mouse data at the end of Q1 of 21, and it kind of led to this Q3 of 22 acquisition. And so it's been a very intentional, even though we're a small company, we've always had a lot of programs running in parallel. And that really has to do with risk mitigation and making sure that we have, it's the key to being able to make the right scientific decisions is to be able to do it without fear. And so we had enough programs going so that we can always look at the science and say, well, this is down prioritized, or maybe even we're not going to work on this one anymore because we've got a bunch of other stuff that's just as interesting and just as exciting going on. And so I think it's really hard to make good decisions if, your house depends on it, or, your living depends on it. You have to have an environment where those decisions are as free as possible from the really hard economic consequences. And so the way to survive a transition like that is to make it effective. Yes, it was a really big change because we shifted from 100% focus or 80% focus on PD-1 IL-2 to working on all of our other programs once we moved all of the data over to Roche. But in another way, it was just another part of the cycle. We're preparing to go through that again. Now we've chosen a program. We're going to choose a candidate in Q1 or Q2 of next year. We're shifting resources into that program. We've even done another spin out to house that program and to give us the option of selling it in the same way.
We know that early stage biopharmas need support. Producing and scaling a biologic molecule is not easy. Companies with new or evolving programs need assistance every step of the way. Join us each week as we discuss all things emerging biotech, including regulatory, financing, and more. The pod is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva, a global provider of technologies and services that advance and accelerate the development, manufacture, and delivery of therapeutics, from idea to injection. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. Tell me a little bit about that. You mentioned, we laid everyone off on Monday and brought them back in on Tuesday. That's great.
Yeah.
26 team members. Is that correct?
I believe that's what we were at that point. Yeah. We're at 31 now.
Yeah. And you didn't lose anyone. Was there any concern, with that, with that transition? It's disruptive regardless. I mean, as smooth as it can possibly be, it's still going to be a little bit disruptive. Was there any concern?
I think there was a lot of celebration. We all, we had a structure where everybody who worked for the company participated in that, in the celebration and in some of the economic returns from it. So it's a strategy that's good for the employees too. Yeah. And one of the things that we've tried to do as a whole management team right from the start is be really transparent with people. And so I want, to the extent possible, of course there's stuff that's secret when we're doing a negotiation, but everybody knew this was going on. And everybody kind of knew as the ups and downs and, the probability that it was going to succeed. What's this week's probability of success? And so I think that also helps keep stability. It's just that people they don't have to worry that there's something going on that they don't know about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when we said laid off on Monday and, came to work at Bonum on Tuesday, it wasn't as if they heard that news on Friday. Like,
Sure, yeah.
It was an ongoing conversation, as John said. So I think that really did make it seamless.
Kind of makes it fun to be laid off, right?
Right, exactly. And people were given both letters.
Can we have a week?
Time, right. So yeah. And we had, we had a big celebration for it. And there was a lot of joy, and people were excited that something that they had poured so much time and energy into would now continue to move forward and get to patients. I mean, that's all of us. That's why we do this work, to help patients. And, I think it was clear that Roche would be an excellent party to do that in a way that would set the program and patients up for the best possible outcome.
That was a good part of why we were so excited about doing this, is, as Neela says, that we really think Roche was the best partner for this. They've got a long history in IL-2. They're not somebody who's going to give up on it. They did. They put 3 different IL-2 immunocytokines into the clinic over the course of 6 to 8 or been working on it for the last 10 years. They've got a history of interest in it, and so we were really, a lot of the return from this is going to be on milestones, and so we really wanted to make sure that both it had the best chance of getting into the clinic as fast as possible, and that they weren't going to just change their mind 2 years from now and move on to something else.
Yeah,
they struck us as an organization that really had a sense of a dedication to making this work.
And they remain invested in Bonum Therapeutics, which is where I kind of want to take the conversation for a minute now, because we haven't even discussed the fact that when Bonum came to be, it came to be with a $93 million Series A last fall, which is not not inconsequential in this current funding landscape. Tell me a little bit, Neela, did that fall under your auspices as well?
No, that was in John's court, and we made a very mindful decision about that, because John had to start those discussions and negotiations while we were in the process of cleaning up and closing, all the little bits and pieces that needed to be done for the Roche deal. And also, just based on his depth of experience, it's something that made the most sense for him to lead on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, John, tell me about that experience. A lot going on, and now you're raising money too.
Well, it was a multi-year process, because when we got the PD-1 IL-2 data, we started the data in 2021 that was the basis for this acquisition. That was a trigger for us to shift from being purely science to adding a bunch of functions that we need to take that forward. First, Neela for business development, and then David Bienvenu to build a protein sciences team and expanding other aspects of the team. So we needed more money, and we planned to take PD-1 IL-2 into phase 1 ourselves. That's been our plan from the start, is that we're doing these really transformative medicines, and that they'd be most valuable when it's been shown to work in people. So I was in the midst of doing a Series B based on that data. And in parallel, we'd initiated these discussions with Roche. And we had a good consortium of crossover investors, really top-level crossover investors, who wanted, when we were in the midst of discussing like a $90 to $100 million Series B that would let us take PD-1 IL-2 into phase 1. Mm-hmm. And Neela and I, at some point, came to the conclusion that there was a deal to be made with Roche. And so we presented this to the board, and it was a deal that would make sense for the current investors, with our post money at that point, but it wouldn't have made sense if we brought in $100 million. If we'd had brought in $100 million, we would have had a $150 million post, a $250 million deal, or wouldn't make any sense. Give us $150 million now this year, and we give you back $200 million next year. That's not a venture kind of a deal. And so what our board decided to do was to do a bridging Series B. So we did an internal round that was in two tranches. There was a $10 million first tranche, and the goal there was just to play out, can we do the deal? And then the backup was another $20 million if the deal, we as a board decided not to do the deal. That 20 million would have given us the time to take the program forward and relaunch the Series B, the outside investor consortium. And so we got the deal done with about, $100,000 left in the bank. So did a small bridging round, a bridge loan to get the finances in place. But basically, it was the same group of investors who, they got their money back and they put a portion of that back in. We brought in Vivo, one of this, sort of top level, larger VC funds that can be a transition to, the anchor of a big Series B. So we have that in place. And it has been a little bit unusual in the sense that our very committed board, and even during a time of really hard biotech downturn, that did potentially have a bit of an impact on the deal, but it didn't. We still got a fantastic deal that was really good for everybody and a good return for the investors. And so they were eager to support the strategy, put the money back in, and we added Vivo.
Yeah.
Putting it together, even, it was sort of weird because our situation, because of the particular circumstances, was really different than the rest of the industry.
Yeah, because of that difference, I'm curious about, Neela's mentioned several times that you've got a very supportive board, and transparent, and has the company's back. But because that deal and what you're doing is, I just had a conversation with a friend of mine who's a biotech exec recently, who's doing some different things, and he talked about the investment community and sort of the de facto standard of biotech these days, when everything's risky, doesn't like different. Different can be dangerous if you don't look, if you don't look proven or the same, that can be construed as dangerous. So was there any, contention at the board level as the deal kind of came to pass?
Not really as the deal came to pass. I mean, all of that discussion happened for the Series A. I mean, we were just doing what we said we were going to do. Mm-hmm. And so it was contentious. The idea of doing a spin out wasn't, there were investors who really didn't like that idea of trying to do an individual asset sale. And I feel very fortunate to have found a group of investors who were willing to take it. We had very little data. It was two people working in the lab for a couple of years, myself and Shannon Okada, and we had some toy demo models when that funding came through. They put in $22 million to support really developing a whole new class of medicines, of protein therapeutic. I mean, it's easy to say, but these really are different. They're therapeutics that actually sense their environment and change their activity. And that's something that nobody's done before. And, we had a working model. We believed it was doable, but it took real vision on the part of the investors to be willing to do that. It was not it was an investor favorable deal in terms of the economic terms, but well deserved.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to, I realize that I'm abusing your time, and I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, but I certainly want to give you an opportunity to get into a little bit about what Bonum is focused on now, what Bonum's doing next. And I don't know to the extent that you can share on that. What does sort of the pipeline look like at this point?
Yeah, so I can tell you a little bit about the science, and then Neela will tell you about how we're planning to, our strategy for this.
Yeah.
From the scientific point of view, our lead program is a LAG3 regulated IL-2. So it's a conceptually somewhat similar to the PD-1 IL-2. It's a way of delivering this potent cytokine to the cells, the T cells that are actually able to attack the tumor. We also have programs in interferon alpha, which is another pleiotropic, incredibly potent, effective cytokine that's limited by toxicity. It's probably even less popular with patients than IL-2 is. A number of different programs there. We're working on IL-12, incredibly potent. It's interferon alpha and IL-2 are approved. IL-12 has never been approved because it's so systemically toxic. We're also addressing the TGF-beta axis with cell-targeted TGF-beta inhibitors and starting to explore areas outside of that, autoimmune in particular. And so the theme is trying to find places where we're getting really good at making these regulated molecules at this point. And so we want to grow as a company. We'll be taking LAG-3 IL-2 into phase 1. And we feel that that's like a really important for a drug discovery company, having that within the organization, the ability and the knowledge about early human trials is a really important stimulus for our ability to make really good drugs, and they're much more valuable at that stage. So we'll be growing as an organization, and with continuing on the theme of having a lot of programs running in parallel, and then just picking, if we want to put something in the clinic, preclinical development each year, it's the one that races to the head based on both the technical aspects, the science, and on interest from potential partners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Neela, go ahead.
Leading our BD strategy as well, because our internal portfolio programs, as John has mentioned, are ones that we intend ultimately to partner. We're not going to, in the near term, be an organization that conducts pivotal phase 3 trials, and we're certainly not building a sales force. But we do see a great deal of value in our platform for making new molecules. And so we've got the set that we're doing. But obviously, with the number of people, there's only a certain number of programs that we can undertake. And we would like to be able to broaden the reach of our platform technology working with partners. So the second prong of our BD strategy is really around collaborations, where the partner comes to us with a problem that they want to solve, a protein that they want to regulate and what they want to regulate it with. Mm-hmm. We would make bespoke molecules for them, and then they would be the ones to take those programs forward. And those discussions are ongoing, and they would let us expand. John mentioned that we're now, in autoimmune disease, that's sort of the nearest switch to taking immuno-onc molecules and now playing them out in the autoimmune space. But we see that there's potential for application in many other diseases, in metabolic disease, potentially in pain, in fibrosis. So we see that potential. It's just that it would not make sense we want to have a broad portfolio, but to start to add all those various therapy areas would not be a wise decision on our part.
Yeah. What's your mindset now, Neela, as you look forward? I mean, I know that there are many, many moving parts and many, I guess, inflection points between now and the next deal. So I'm not asking you to look at your crystal ball, but do you feel like with every deal that's done, like you've had deal making experience with prior companies, orchestrated this great deal with Roche. Do you feel like every deal that's done, like, does your mind start mapping out more scenarios like early on? Like, are you mapping out the next deal scenario right now? Or does that sort of play, does it hit you all at once? It's a very vague question, but I'm trying to get a sense of your mindset, right? Like,
yeah. And I I do, but it's not in isolation. These discussions are with the core senior leadership team, because each of us brings highly valuable insights to the table. And we talk about, oh, it looks like we have a line of sight for this program to get to a clinical candidate. When do we think potential partners would be interested in this? What would be the value inflection points for them? How does that match with our expectations for financial return?
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, we start to play that piece out. We know one foundational piece that we've always had in mind is that early engagement with potential partners is highly valuable, because if you listen, you will learn what data they want to see, what's important to them. And I'm not saying that we're going to change our whole strategy, but if you hear from 3 pharma partners, hey, I'd really like to see this model, then maybe we take that under consideration and include it in our plan. So we're doing our very best. And with the Roche deal, as part of our history, we're getting the conversations that we want with pharma partners and getting that early feedback and taking that into account as we map out potential deals. I mean, we all understand and agree that it's simply potential. There's no certainty about it, but it does help us to plan and to think through what we need to do next.
Yeah. What do you find yourself like? What's occupying your time now? It's like, it's a naive question, but like, I'm curious, like, you spent, you rolled up your sleeves and I'm sure spent months and months and months doing very, very hard work in terms of diligence and deal making and negotiations and so on and so forth, structuring and execution. Do you, I guess maybe I'm answering in part my own question. Like, are you working on execution right now, or are you like what does a deal maker spend their time doing when there's not necessarily something on the table to be dealt, I guess is the question.
Well, I mean, the what you're saying,
Neela's like, I've been on vacation for a couple months.
the deals to be made don't come out of nowhere, right? There's a lot of groundwork that needs to be laid ahead of time to make that happen. And so I've spent a lot of my time over the past year working out both the strategy and opening those doors with potential either partners for our portfolio programs or collaboration partners. And, as with the science, you undertake a lot of experiments and some of them just don't work out. And you can't know a priori that they're not going to work out. I mean, yes, if you think it's a silly experiment to do, or you think that group is never going to be a legitimate partner, you don't invest your time in it. But there's many, many conversations that just need to be had in order to find out who's serious, where your values align, where you align financially, where you align scientifically. So I would say that, the past year has been laying the groundwork, for what's going to come next for us.
Do you find yourself on the road a lot, doing like a lot of networking? And
we did the entire Roche deal without ever sitting down with them in person.
Wow.
Not a single in-person meeting. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
it's like the standard way of doing business ever since COVID, right? You've adopted the COVID methodology.
Exactly. So the one big conference that I did attend, I came back with COVID. So
perfect. Yeah.
Necessarily super excited about that. If it makes sense, of course, we'll meet in person. But I think everyone has adapted to what is the key information that you need, and being able to see people's body language on Zoom. I think we've adapted to this way, and it allows everyone to work faster. You don't have to wait for schedules to align and, I can't be away for 5 days in a row to travel halfway around the world. No, I'm going to be on the phone with you tomorrow. Yeah. And we're going to hammer this out and get it done. And so in some ways, it's accelerated our ability to get things done. And part of that laying the foundation is building that relationship. Do I think it would be more efficient to build relationships by sitting down over a cup of coffee with someone? Probably, but we substitute that with, okay, I'm going to get to know you in advance over time, and I'll put the time and effort into it. And I'm finding that our partners are happy to do that too.
Yeah. So is it a safe assumption that I won't be able to buy you a cup of coffee at JP Morgan in a month and a half or so?
That's probably a safe bet.
Okay. John, you either? I won't be able to buy you a cup of coffee
No,
there either.
although Neela is in the Bay Area, so there's some opportunity. He might have a non-JPM coincident coffee.
You probably wouldn't have to twist my arm too hard to get me out of the market district there, for the financial district, for an hour or so.
Sounds good.
During that week. Neela, it strikes me that, I don't know what's more rare in biotech, a woman in the science side of biotech, like doing science. I think I do. I think just anecdotally, I think a woman in the business development side of biotech is more rare than, sort of the traditional STEM approach. Would you agree with that? Like, I
think it's changing. I do think it's changing, but
yeah?
Yes, I think when I started my career, that was absolutely the case. Absolutely the case. And that even then women were rare in the more senior roles, but that is changing. I think, when I started, I was often the only in the room, only woman in the room presenting to a room full of men. And
let me just clarify. When you started in business development?
No, when I started in the science side, started my career altogether. Yeah. And I would say that I was extremely fortunate. I did seek out, and I was fortunate to find both bosses who supported me and to build relationships with senior folks who advocated for me. So, I guess the thing for me is I want the path to be easier and better for women who follow. So I do mentor younger women coming along or people who reach out to me. And I consider that part of my professional obligation. I honestly consider it part of a professional obligation of men and women, not just women, to do that kind of work, because everyone benefits when we plug in to the best talent. It's beneficial for the individuals, but it's also highly beneficial for the companies. Companies, now we have data to say that companies where there are diverse backgrounds represented in the most senior leadership levels, they outperform their peers. It's now established. And so it's good for everybody, I think.
Neela, you mentioned something that I want to follow up with you on, and that's around sort of the opportunity to create a better, more clear, maybe more direct path for the women who follow behind you. And I've had plenty of conversations about this with women in biotech where, if pressed, I mean, quite frankly, if pressed on, or when I've pressed them on, like, what does that mentorship look like? Like, how do you kind of codify that and make it daily practice? Like, it's one thing to say it, right? Like, we should all be lifting each other up and creating opportunities for one another. It's another thing to come into work, every day, every week, every month, every quarter, every year, and exercise those muscles. So just give me some, not to put you on the spot, but give me some thoughts around, like, how do you flex those muscles in a way where you feel like you're actually contributing to the cause?
I think that the first thing is to be open to it and to make it clear that you're open, because women have approached me and said, "Hey, I heard you say that you were willing and interested. Would you be willing to be a mentor to me?" And what that means is a commitment to meet regularly, to listen and hear about what they're doing in their career, what they want to do, and help them map out the steps that it will take to get to the next place. Whether that is, hey, you really should consider getting certified in project management because you'd be able to open that door. Or, oh, I see, you really want to go into this field. I know somebody there. I'm happy to make an introduction for you. So it's always customized. But I think that getting to know the person and understanding where they're trying to go and seeing how you can use your network or your knowledge or your experience to help them get there is really core.
Yeah, very good. All right. I've, like I said, I've been abusive of your time. You guys have been very generous with it, and I appreciate that. I know I've been steering the ship around in circles. We've covered a lot of water, but I'll just give you each an opportunity to share like what you're most excited about next. Like what's sort of an imminent opportunity or thing happening at Bonum that you're most excited about. Neela, you go first.
I'm super excited about the fact that we are well positioned to take one of our programs into preclinical development and have a line of sight to get that into the clinic. But I'm equally excited by the fact that we are not going to leave our other programs behind. There's some other mechanisms that we're working on that I think are really compelling and will really make a difference for patients. So, yeah.
And you're fortunate to be, I'll just make a side note there. You're fortunate to be in a financial position, at least, from the outside looking in, that affords you the opportunity to not let go of some of those follow-on opportunities, which is, it's a great place to be. So congratulations to you both for the work you've put into finding yourself in that position. Yeah. John, what are you most fired up about?
Well, I have to say it's the same thing for what Neela is saying. I've never worked on preclinical development. I've always done really early stage programs. So I'm really excited to be working with a team, helping to build a team that's going to do that and watch that process and build it into our company. And I think I can't tell you how excited I am about this set of programs we're working on. We've got some really cool drugs with really interesting potential, things where you take these super potent, very broadly active molecules and deliver them with just like surgical precision to a single cell type and get a whole new bit of biology out of that. And I think that's incredibly exciting. And the challenge is, growing the team to be able to take advantage of these things. I mean, we've grown more slowly than a lot of companies, and have at our stage where we've first had funding, serious venture funding in 2018. We're 5 years into it at this point, and we're 30 people. We've tried to grow, prioritized being really effective and hiring the right team and using resources wisely. I think we've got a lot done with a small group, but being able to expand that, I think that our challenge and what interests me is figuring out how to grow, how to double the size of the company and still get twice as much done, not get, 25% more or 25% less done.
Yeah. Continuing to learn those business lessons you mentioned from the outset of the conversation, right? Yeah. Yeah. I've got to ask you, Dr. Mulligan, real quick before I let you go. So I've had you on the phone for like an hour and 20 minutes now, and you haven't stopped walking since we started talking. Do you walk all day long, all calls, all meetings, all day long? Pretty much. Yeah. I have an underdesk treadmill and a standing desk, and I don't get out a lot. So, So you got to do, there's some good advice right there. Yeah. Dr. Patel, Dr. Mulligan, I appreciate the chance to talk with you. I think it's been a very insightful conversation. I look forward to paying attention to what Bonum is doing, and hope to have you back on the show. Later on, maybe when we get a little bit further down the road in the clinic, to talk about some of the ongoing plans there.
We look forward to it. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's Bonum Therapeutics Chief Business Officer, Dr. Neela Patel, and CEO, Dr. John Mulligan. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online and Life Science Connect with support from Cytiva, which demonstrates its commitment to new and emerging biopharma companies at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. If you like listening to conversations with biotech leaders like Neela and John, subscribe to the Business of Biotech podcast. Sign up for our newsletter at bioprocessonline.com/BOB. And always be sure to leave us a review. Let us know how we're doing. And thanks for listening.